Hi, it's Blake with FicheBait. In a previous video, we walked through using the Laserfiche deployment toolkit to install Laserfiche. So in this video, we'll review what was installed and configured and what wasn't. I'll also walk through how to change a few configuration settings, such as running Laserfiche services as Windows accounts. Let's get started. So the first Laserfiche application that we're going to take a look at is Laserfiche Directory Server. So to start with, what has been configured by the deployment toolkit? You can see here I have directory server pulled up. It is licensed, it's running, everything is great with it. So it actually did the initial configuration for us. It put in the licensing site name, it activated through Laserfiche, pulled the master license data back, and it created the database for us. So we can see here all of our licenses, the products or the applications that we're licensed for. All of that's been done. If we go to IIS, we can actually pull up the default website and look at the bindings. And for port 443, we can see that the SSL certificate was bound to that port for us automatically as well. And that was all done through the deployment toolkit. So if we also take a look at our settings, we can see that within settings and identity providers, our default identity provider has been configured. The server is on a domain, which is a requirement of directory server. And so it goes ahead and registers, as you would expect, your domain on there. If we look at accounts, we can also see that we have 4 groups configured, as well as the users that we told it to configure for us in the deployment toolkit. So all that has been done for us. So what needs to be done? If you go and you look at settings, anything in the email server, email template, password policy, all that kind of stuff would still need to be configured. None of that has been done for us. I do have a video called Configuring Laserfiche Directory Server 11, if you want to go out and watch that, and it walks through some of that default configuration that you can do. The other thing that it doesn't do is if we look at the Windows service accounts for a directory server, we can see that it is still running as a network service. The deployment toolkit does not change it to a Windows account. You have to do that after the fact. And as well, if we look at the application pools for directory server, we can see that they're also running network service as well. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll walk through actually changing the service accounts for those services and how you can do that the correct way to get everything running how you want. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the account that is used for the directory server Windows service. So I am just going to go to Properties. We'll go to Log On, Browse, and I am going to type in my Laserfiche account that I want to run this particular Windows service for us. And then I will type in the password. So once we've done that, I can hit apply. And you can see it's been given a right that it needs there. And then it tells us that the new logon name will not take effect until we stop and restart the service. So let's go ahead and do that. And it's restarted. So from there we can click OK. We can now see that directory server service is running as my util Laserfiche account. So that's the first step. The next thing that I'm going to do is go into IIS, and I am going to change these two license manager application pools, which are actually directory server, and have them run as that Laserfiche account as well. So to do that, we can, if we go to basic settings, we can't get to that information here. We have to actually go to advanced settings. And if we scroll down in the advanced settings, we can see identity. So if you click in there, you'll then get the ellipsis button. And then you can say custom account and set. And then we can enter in our username and our password. And we click OK. And there we go. And we'll do the same thing with the other license manager service or application pool. All right, and now we can see that they are running. It accepted it because we have applications just showing up there for us. All right, so once we have those two things, we then need to go into directory server and we need to modify the connection string. So the connection string can be found by going to settings and on the general tab, and then down here where it specifies the licensing site, we can click on modify connection string. So if you read through this, these two sections here are an example of what you need to do. Since we're changing this to the Windows authentication, we're actually going to use this as our template. I've already gone through and created my connection string. You can see it's not very long. Essentially what I'm doing is adding in the server name of my SQL server and then the SQL database name for LFDS. And I will go ahead after I've pasted that in, and we'll click OK. So once that is successfully applied, you will get your success message. And then the last thing that you need to do is to come into your services and restart your directory server service. And it's always a good idea once you've done that to go ahead and refresh directory server and just verify that everything is still working correctly. So the next Laserfiche application that we'll take a look at is the Laserfiche server. So first, what did the deployment toolkit do for us? Again, if we had the Laserfiche server on a different server than directory server, it would have bound the SSL certificate for us in IIS. If we open up the administration console, we can see that it created a repository for us. If we had any users or groups, it would have created those for us in the repository as well. And in the background, if we were to look in the registry, it actually added what is needed to enable the Laserfiche server to communicate with other Laserfiche applications using TLS or SSL. So all that has been done for us. So very similar to the directory server, what hasn't been done for us is our Laserfiche services. You can see the Laserfiche server service is running as a local system, not as a Windows account. So we would need to go through and do that. If we look in the administration console and we look at the repository options and settings, we can see that the web client URL and audit trail URLs haven't been set for us, even though they were installed as part of the deployment toolkit. So that's something else that we would need to do manually. And then the last thing is the password policy. So just like directory server, it does not set the password policies for us as part of the deployment toolkit either. So all that needs to be manually configured. So what we will go ahead and walk through in this video is changing our SQL connection to use Windows authentication. So to start with, we're going to go to our Windows services. We're going to open up our Laserfiche server service, go to the logon account, and we're going to change it to this account. Click Browse. Select our Laserfiche account. Hit apply. It lets us know that it won't take effect until after we restart the service. So we'll go ahead and stop it and then start it. Okay, so we can now see that the Laserfiche server service is running as our Laserfiche account. And if we come back to the admin console, what we want to do is when we go over to FicheBait, or whatever the name of your repository is, we can right-click on it, go to All Tasks, and then click on Change DBMS Connection. So this will bring up a window for us where we can now go through and change how the Laserfiche server authenticates to our SQL server. So we're simply just going to change this to use Windows authentication. This goes off of the account that's running the Laserfiche server service. So by changing it there, we can click refresh on the database names, just make sure that our database still shows up, and we hit OK. It's going to let us know that, hey, if you do this, it's going to log out your users. Are you sure you want to do that? We're going to go ahead and click yes. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So next up, we have the web client. We go to the web client configuration page. We can review what's already been done, just like the other applications we've already reviewed. If the web client was installed on a different machine, the SSL certificate would have been bound to the default website for us. We can see here on the connection page of the Laserfiche web client configuration page that our repository has been configured for us automatically. And it has also enabled TLS to communicate with the Laserfiche server. So as I said previously, that was enabled on the Laserfiche server side automatically as part of the deployment toolkit. If we go to settings, we can see that our email configuration was already done. We set that up in the deployment toolkit. We had our global settings, so it went ahead and imported that here. And if we look at services, we can see that our web client host URL was automatically filled in. HTTPS redirection has been configured, and our directory server has been configured for us as well. So anything else that you would want to enable, if you want to be able to access Audit Trail by right-clicking on an entry in the repository, if you have a distributed computing cluster, you're using the Laserfiche app, any of that kind of stuff, you would have to come in and manually configure that. So the next application we have is Laserfiche Forms. Just like the other web applications, if Forms was installed on a different server, the deployment toolkit would have automatically bound the SSL certificate to the default website in IIS. Forms is automatically licensed as well, just like the other applications. If we go to the services, we can see that the routing service is running a local account. And if we go to the Forms configuration page, we can see that the initial Forms configuration was done for us. It has connected to our SQL server, created our database as well. We have LF_forms, and it's using the SQL Server authentication. If we go to the Form Server tab, we can see that it's set up our primary form server URL. It's using HTTPS redirection for us automatically as well. And on the User Authentication tab, we have our Forms host URL. It's automatically connected us to the directory server STS, connecting us to our licensing site. And if you remember in the deployment toolkit, we also set up groups and users, and we told it which ones would have access to forms. And so it has actually gone through and added that for us automatically as well. If we look at the Laserfiche tab, we can see that it's connected Laserfiche workflow. So forms and workflow are set up to automatically communicate with each other by default. So some of the things that we would need to change that the deployment toolkit doesn't do for us, just like the other applications, we would need to update the application pool user account. So here we can see it's using application pool identity. The Windows services are just running the local services. And so that would need to be done. And then if we wanted to do any volume configuration or assigning of roles to users and groups, all of that would manually need to be done as well. So let's go ahead and start with changing the Forms routing service to run as a Windows account. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the properties of the Forms routing service. We'll go to the Logon tab, and I'm going to change this to my Laserfiche user. We'll set our password. It's going to let us know that it has to be restarted in order for it to take effect. So let's go ahead and do that. And then the next thing we'll do is we will come into IIS and we will update the identity that runs the application pool. Click OK, OK, and OK. And if we refresh, we can see that it is connecting correctly. All right, so once we have that, we're going to go back to our database tab in the Forms configuration page. And we will change the authentication to use Windows authentication and click Save. It'll give you the message that the LF Forms database already exists. Would you like to register this database? Yes, we do. So we'll click OK. And it saved our configuration. And that's all that we need to do for Laserfiche Forms. And the last Laserfiche application that we're going to review is Laserfiche Workflow. So the deployment toolkit has basically walked through the entire workflow configuration manager for us. You can see when I have this open that we have our workflow server required, subscriber, the repositories, email servers, trustee directories, and the workflow web services. So all of that has been configured automatically for us. We don't have to do anything else there, and it's ready to go. If we open the workflow administration console, and we look at our external objects, for web services, we can see this is the form server. So it's automatically set up to communicate with our form server without anything additional that we need to do. If we go to the email tab, it has configured our email server for us automatically as well. For the configuration, the workflow web services were also automatically configured to use HTTPS instead of HTTP. So that has been completed. So the things that are not done for us, the workflow server is not configured automatically to communicate with a Laserfiche server using TLS or SSL. So that would need to be done. The default connection profile in the workflow designer isn't configured. The workflow services, you can see are running local system, and our database connection, if we go to our workflow server configuration, we can see that it's using a local system account rather than using Windows authentication to talk to SQL. So that would need to be done manually as well. So let's first change the service account, just like what we've done on the other ones. We're going to come into our Laserfiche Workflow 11 service. We'll go to log on. We'll change our account. Enter our password. Tells us we need to restart. We will go ahead and do that. And we can see our service account is there now, so that is good. And now in the Workflow Configuration Manager, we'll click Configured next to the Workflow Server. We'll click Next. And now on the Workflow Database part of this is where we're going to change this to Windows Authentication. Click Next through everything else, and click Finish. We'll restart our workflow service here. It takes a moment sometimes. And everything's completed. So that part is done for us. If we want workflow to communicate with the Laserfiche server using TLS, then we need to come into our server configuration in the workflow administration console, go to advanced server options, and go to properties. And on the general tab, there's a Laserfiche server section, and we just need to check the box to use TLS when connecting to Laserfiche and hit OK. And that's all that we need to do for our Laserfiche workflow configuration. I hope you've enjoyed this video and got a good look at what the deployment toolkit does, what it configures, what it doesn't configure, and some things that you might manually want to go through and change. If you have enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, keep fishing.